So I once put out a Christmas card from the Independence Institute, and it had a bunch of Labradors on the front. It had white Labradors and black Labradors. And you opened up the card and said, yes, black labs matter, but don't all labs matter? To clarify this, Mike Gonzalez from the Heritage Foundation, who has been doing a real deep dive not on black labs, but Black Lives Matter. And it's really hard to have a discussion about the Black Lives Matter movement without it devolving really quickly into all lives matter. And then you go back and forth and, no, we're just saying a simple thing, Black Lives Matter. Well, of course they do. But you think they matter and it's a push towards socialism, and that's what fascinates me.
No, I don't think that. And I don't say all lives matter. All lives obviously do matter. But I think it's important to say Black Lives Matter. You know, blacks have suffered uniquely and exceptionally in our history. Mm-hmm. We don't even have to explain how that is. Everybody gets it. So I don't say all lives matter, not just because it's a provocation. It's because I think it's important to affirm.
Do you think it's provocation?
I wouldn't mean it. I actually do think all lives matter because I believe 7 billion souls on Earth, all of them matter. But I'm very happy to say Black Lives Matter. When it comes to this issue of Black Lives Matter, you have to separate the components, right? You have the concept, you have the movement, and I grapple with the movement. I don't know what a movement is. And then you have the definite organizations and their leaders. My book, and what I talk about and write about, are the organizations and their leaders.
So this idea of the movement, and I've had these discussions of Black Lives Matter. Yes, they do. I live in a very white city, Boulder, Colorado, and I walk around my neighborhood and I see a whole bunch of Black Lives Matter signs, and I'm like, man, you're just doing a lot. And you know, I was born after the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was signed into law, and my experience here, growing up in Colorado. I did not witness the systematic oppression of African Americans. Now, as it happened before, I'm not saying it didn't happen, but I see that by every accountable measure, we're moving in the right direction. Not fast enough by any means, and I wonder what's behind this push. And I thought it was mostly a reaction to Trump, but it actually has much deeper roots than that.
Yeah, firstly, I differentiate the movement from the organizations. The movement is, I guess, the people who marched, the people who pitched signs on their lawns, and they had a variety of motivations, and one of which is virtue signaling. Let's be honest about that. I went to Dartmouth. I have a good job as a lawyer of a financial sector, but I want to show to the world that I support all the right causes. So I put this sign on my lawn.
My favorite one in the Boulder area because there is this arms race for virtue signaling. So it started off with the "We Recycle" signs, and then it turned into Black Lives Matter, and now it's the litany of in this home we believe Black Lives Matter, love is love, no person is illegal.
Right.
I mean, it's just this oozing of see how good I am.
And it really and it is those people who are the most intolerant, by the way.
Yeah.
Who would, if I went in there and talked to them about my beliefs, they would expel me from their home right away. By the way, those signs, I repeat a variation of those signs every Sunday when I say the Nicene Creed. I believe in one God, Father, maker of heaven and earth. It reminds me of that. It's just as religious. But virtue signaling was not the only motivation. There were people who really had righteous anger about this harrowing 9 minutes in which a very bad person sat, kipped his knee on a human's neck, and it was horrible. But those feelings were really manipulated by organizations that want to end the American experiment such as we know it today. And that's really, we need to, and I wrote my book because I want people to understand this, because the media never talks about the components that is made up of the organizations and their founders. They talk about the concept, which is beautiful, and the movement. the marchers and all that. But if you Google Black Lives Matter, it doesn't take you to a movement. It doesn't take you to a beautiful lawn sign. It doesn't take you to a beautiful concept. It takes you to the Black Lives Matter's Global Network Organization, BLM-GNF, the main BLM organization.
And this is an official organization.
Yes.
It's got an employee identification number. It files a 990. Is it an organization?
It doesn't file a 990 because it has a fiscal sponsor, which right now happens to be the Tides Center.
Does it have is it a legal entity?
Yes, it is.
Because there's a lot of organizations.
It's a legal entity which has millions of dollars in the bank.
Wow.
It has a bill in Congress. It supports other bills. It endorses or opposes candidates. It even has a foreign policy. It is virulently anti-Israel, even when Israel is fighting Hamas. At the precise moment when Cuban communists were rounding up dissidents in the streets of the island and torturing them, at that moment, BLM-GNF thought it was a really good idea to put out a statement supporting the communists. So that is what I talk about.
All right. So when I see the virtue signaling BLM, that's really not what you're focusing.
No.
You're focusing in on. And by the way, yeah, Black Lives Matter. And if Black Lives Matter, we should be talking about how many more people who are black are killed at the hands of other African Americans. But you can't talk about that, otherwise you're a racist. And you look at a lot of the work being done by, I'm trying to remember who it was, at Manhattan Institute. She's done all the great work on...
Heather McDonald.
There we go. Thank you.
She's fantastic.
Yeah. On crunching the actual numbers.
She's been doing this for years, by the way.
Yeah, before all this came to a boil, showing them, this myth of cops are out to get the black man.
Right.
And so it's just... The there isn't there, despite these terrible instances that should be brought to light and should be addressed, but so should the other 10,000 black men who have been killed, not by the hands of the police.
So all of that is true, but let's take the even lower hanging fruit.
Okay.
The FBI last week made it official that the spike in the murder rate in 2020 was 30%, and that is the highest since 1776. It's never been higher than that. In fact,
you mean a spike, the rate.
The rate of increase. It's still at a very low rate.
Right.
Let's be serious about this. But the spike was 30%. So the second highest spike ever was 1968, another very comparable politically charged year. But the murder rate in 68 rose by an astonishing 12%. This year's surge, 2020, and it's growing again this year. Now, if you listen to the New York Times or the Atlantic Monthly or the Washington Post, they say, well, it was COVID. And no, that doesn't pass the laugh test because the rest of the world had COVID.
Doesn't make you kill other people.
The rest of the world had lockdowns. The rest of the world had layoffs. The murder rate decreased in the rest of the world, like 16% in England. Ours went up by 30%, and it is growing again this year. It is clearly a continuation of the Ferguson effect. The documentable increase in murders between 14, Ferguson, and 19, when people have written papers on this, when the murder rate in those cities, in the 70 places where Black Lives Matter had protests, went up by a lot, and an extra 6,000 people got killed, murdered. So that's the Ferguson effect, and what it is.
Why is it the Ferguson?
Because police pull back. So Ferguson it becomes the St. Louis suburb. It becomes the ground zero for all the Marxist groups around the country in the aftermath of the killing of Michael Brown. Alicia Garza, one of the co-founders of BLM-GNF, brings groups from all over the country. They have what in these times a Marxist magazine published, founded by Herbert Marcuse and Julian Bond and Daniel Ellsberg and Noam Chomsky. They called it a freedom ride. Alicia Garza's freedom ride. They gave her credit for bringing Marxists from all over the country. And that's when BLM really stops being a movement. It becomes real organizations. She herself says that her goal, this is her words, is to keep working to dismantle the organizing principle of society. That's pretty holistic.
So help me understand this, and I get that. I also get the Ferguson effect, that it is certainly measurable that police officers are a lot more reluctant to do their jobs, pull the trigger, and therefore
Proactive policing.
Yeah,
proactive policing. Is
right, and I get that. And also, you look at the city like Denver right now. If it's a property crime, we don't have time for it. I mean, who wants to go into the police department now and become a cop? It's a bad time. All right, get all that aside.
I talked to a lot of cops across the country about this, by the way.
Really?
Yeah. They tell me it's horrible.
It is. I mean, it's got to be demoralizing.
Right.
But get back to the idea that the official BLM organization, which has been around for a long time but is now centralized and funded, that its goal is Marxist. Its root and what it wants to do is being Marxist. Let me start with this. You say it's well funded. How do you know that?
Because they themselves, in their 2020 impact report that they issued in March, in fact, I had finished writing my book, I had to make room for the impact report because they were very clear. They say they raised close to $100 million last year alone. They said they've made clear that they were at the center.
$100 million?
Yeah, 93. I think it was 93.
I don't know what you're talking about.
And they said they sent out an astonishing 127 million emails in the second half of 2020 after George Floyd, which had an open rate of 63%, which is unheard of.
No email has an open rate of 63%.
Right, it's usually 25% in the non-public sector.
25% is a great open rate.
They said it was 63%. They said they had 27 million people visited their website after the death of George Floyd. And they said 1.2 million actions were taken as a result of their emails and their digital engagements. So the impact report, which I encourage, it's online, BLM GNF 2020 impact report.
And GNF again stands for?
Global Network Foundation.
All right. This is an actual legal entity.
Yes.
Taking money.
Yes.
It's not a C3 though.
It's a project of a C3, the Tide Center, that gives it that takes away transparency. They don't have to.
They don't have to put out a 990.
Right.
For those who might not follow, tax-exempt organizations, the Independence Institute and the Heritage Foundation, have to put out tax papers that anyone can go see from the IRS. Yeah. Right.
BLM GNF does not need to do that. The Tide Center does. When you give money to BLM GNF, you actually give it to Act Blue, which takes a cut. So Act Blue then gives it to the Tide Center. The Tide Center then funds the projects of BLM GNF. That is that's why it's completely untransparent. People say to me, oh, and it's a complete grift, Patrice Cullors has bought several houses. It's like, I'm not interested in that. A grift, I wouldn't write a book about a grift. By the way, it's a time-honored tradition for communist leaders to own a dacha in the countryside. Brezhnev had one, Andropov had one.
Then help me understand the connection. Black Lives Matter because Black Lives Matter.
To me and to you and
to everybody.
To any rational person.
To anybody.
Right.
Convince me about that their goal is not just about stopping cops from killing black people. Their goal is to end our free society in capitalism.
So Alicia Garza, quoted, the main founder of BLM GNF, there's three founders. Mm-hmm. She could be said to be the primus inter pares, the Napoleon of the three. Although the other two are very important as well.
And they are, by the way?
Patrice Cullors and Opal Tometi.
All right. So I don't know these names. Keep rolling.
So Alicia Garza said to a group of main leftists in 2019, we have to keep working to dismantle the organizing principle of society. We have to dismantle how we've organized society. She has said several times that capitalism is racist. She said also, and I'm paraphrasing here, but closely paraphrasing, that black lives cannot matter if we have capitalism. And there's a reason for this. She was trained from a very early age at the School of Unity and Liberation, Seoul, which is a Marxist preparatory founded by followers of Antonio Gramsci, who was the founder of Italy's Communist Party in the 20s, but more important than that, super influential philosopher in the second half of the 20th century and the first 2 decades of the century. These followers of Gramsci found Seoul, trains Alicia Garza. Alicia Garza is there, she says, her words, and I'm quoting pretty accurately now, there she learns that social movements around the world have always used Marx and Lenin to disrupt systems of oppression. And to her, a system of oppression is capitalism, which uses the wrong ideas, the wrong judgment on people in the way it distributes outcomes, the way it distributes money.
All right, so let me push back on this one, though. The idea that she wants to dismantle the underpinnings of our society.
And she says capitalism is racist.
Let's take the first comment.
Yeah.
Well, if you see the world only on the oppressor-oppressed scale,
right,
and America is systematic oppression, then saying I want to dismantle that could possibly mean I want to dismantle racism, or systematic embedded racism.
Right.
It doesn't, get me from there to I want to take away private property rights and I want the state to control the means of production.
No. They say this. Patrice Cullors calls herself a trained Marxist, and she was trained by Eric Mann, a former member of the Weather Underground who spent 18 months in prison for assault and battery. He trained her at his. By the way, he recruited her. This is his word. He says he recruited Patrice Cullors at the age of 17 to train her at her Labor Community Strategy Center in Los Angeles. He says the goal of his center is to launch an anti-racist, anti-fascist, and anti-imperialist revolution and to take the United States out of the white settler state. I take your word that if it's hermetically sealed, if your worldview is that the United States is systemically racist and systemically oppressive, then you need to destroy the system. It's like the Matrix, the movie The Matrix, in which Neo is told people they don't understand that they're being oppressed. And that's critical theory. Critical theory starts from that from the 1920s and 30s on down. What it teaches is exactly that. The superstructure of society is oppressive, but the people do not know that. And it is the job of critical theorists to tell people how they're being oppressed. Marcuse's famous dictum, all liberation depends on the consciousness of servitude. Until you and I have the consciousness that we're serfs, we're going to continue to perpetuate this oppressive system.
I find that
mind-bending?
No, I was going to say repugnant and nauseating. In that, and it's not to say oppression doesn't happen. I think it does happen. I think we're seeing a lot more oppression now, and it's not a racial thing. It's the command and control state. It's the cancel culture. It's the lack of choice in education. I mean, we can just keep going down. But there's never been a time in human history where people can be more self-directed than they are now. So the idea that we're oppressed and we're just too stupid to know it. Sorry.
And yet really intelligent minds believe this. I mean, you can call Max Horkheimer, many things, but stupid he was not. Herbert Marcuse was evil maybe, but stupid he was not.
It is really hard for me to see guys who are sitting back, drinking a nice craft beer and maybe a nice Indian pale ale as they're fighting with their wife over whether they're watching Netflix or Prime Video tonight when they're watching whatever they're binging on and fighting on where they're going to go this weekend up in the mountains to go. No, I'm sorry. That is not oppression. This is capitalism has given us the most luxurious, the most incredible quality of life throughout all the different stratas. And yes, there's a lot of variation in that. But the poorest of us live like the pharaohs did. And it's only because of the wealth that is created because of a system that believes we are created equal, but we don't fight for equity.
So I mean, you're completely right. And what I say about them is that they really must never have traveled. I have lived at least a year in 7 countries. I have lived in Asia. I have lived
each one for a year?
Yeah, I've lived in Korea for 2 years, Hong Kong for 8 years, Brussels for 6, France for 1, Spain in 2, Cuba 12. I've lived all over the world. I lived in Spain under Franco. I've seen communism and fascism.
Are you on the lam?
I could tell you that we have it pretty good here. We're not perfect.
Now, you're a white guy
We're
who
not
says
perfect.
that. You're a white guy who doesn't get racially profiled, that doesn't get pulled over by the cops, that doesn't get looked down, that doesn't lose job interviews, that doesn't get a bad. And by the way, let me throw this out. I believe there is a lot of systemic racism. The systemic racism comes from the left. The older I get, the more convinced I am that progressives hate poor people, mostly black and brown. I look at, here in Denver, our mobility system, where poor people can't, if you don't afford a car, you're stuck with this god-awful transit system, makes you a second-class citizen. You can only have crappy jobs and live in crappy neighborhoods that have buses, while a guy with a $500 car has the world. We put in these urban growth boundaries so you can't buy a cheaper house and housing prices go crazy. That is only a man-made, government-made phenomenon in a state that is 99% vacant land. There's more than enough room for everyone to have a very affordable house. I mean, we can go through the educational system that because you're in that zip code, you're now tethered to a failing system. I can go over and over. It is the left that hates poor people because they will never empower them to change their lives.
And that is, what do they target mostly? They target meritocracy. Just like and their problem with meritocracy is the same as their problem with the free market system. They say it uses the wrong criteria. It chooses winners and losers on the basis of the wrong criteria. What they don't get, or maybe they do get, is that if you don't have meritocracy, what you end up with is aristocracy. Is people with the good connections. If you get rid of the SAT, if you get rid of tests, if you get rid of any measure of learning, of success, who gets into college?
Let me push back a little bit on that, though. One, meritocracy, it's hard to say meritocracy is wrong and then spend your weekend watching a football game, because everyone who is on that team and is there solely because of their merit. It is judged solely. Anybody.
What they say is life is not athletics. That's their answer to that one.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you, you go to the company that sells photocopiers, and you're gonna learn something on that sales floor about who meritocracy. But let's play the game a little bit. There isn't a real meritocracy because you're a white man. You've been privileged. And by the way, let me say, I've been very privileged. And the privilege is I had parents that gave a damn, that moved to a place where I could go to a better school, and I had a father that was at home. I mean, these are privileges that I've had that I can say some other guy, you didn't have that. It's not your fault that you didn't have a sane family. It's not your fault that you had to live in this life or live in that bad town. So there's truth to that. But the idea that meritocracy is an illusion because it's just part of the system you play. And a white guy believes in meritocracy. The black guy looks at it and goes, "Really? You think that this is just the old white boys club?" And by the way, there's evidence. Let's not discount it completely.
Well, I look at studies have been done, for example, on second-generation West Indians in New York. And why the second generation? The second generation is the U.S. born.
Right.
So but they don't have an accent. They don't sound Jamaican or from Nevis. So they have zero visibility as an immigrant. They have 100% visibility as a black person. When they encounter a racist cop, the racist cop is going to be mean to them. When they encounter a racist shop owner is going to follow them because they're going to think that he's a thief. They're going to be hit with racism, and yet because they have different cultural practices, the family is not just intact, but the parents are super strict. And this is what Van Tran at Columbia University has found. The second generation West Indians from the same bad neighborhoods in Manhattan and the Bronx are closing the gap with whites. They're closing the gap across the 8 indicators that social scientists measure.
I'll give
You look at Ghanaian Americans and Nigerian Americans.
Yeah.
They already have a higher income per capita than a white family.
Grab that for a second. That, for me, is devastating to the Black Lives Marxist narrative that oppression is systematic.
Right.
So Nigerians and folks at Ghana, and also, I mean, from the Ivory Coast, they've come here, and in one generation,
They're black. They're
black.
Yeah.
I see them walking down
They
the street.
suffer racism.
Yeah, they suffer whatever it is.
Right.
But somehow their economic success and their net worths are skyrocketing without, and you think about it, they come to this country, they don't know the language, they don't know the people, they don't know the laws, they don't know the customs, and they see, compared to where they come from, they see opportunity on every step.
And that's what they tell me when I interview them. They said exactly that. They say $1 to me is still $1. It's very valuable. I'll work hard for $1.
Yeah. Instead, by the way, the dependency state, which is what Marxism gives, and what we are on the verge of falling completely into. I would say that we already have a de facto universal basic income, a UBI, where people are just guaranteed money. But it comes from, instead of one source, it comes from 10 different sources. You get your food stamps over here, you get your subsidized rent over here, you got your earned income tax credit over here, and and before you know it, you can be on the dole, and it's heartbreaking. It's absolutely heartbreaking, because when you're on the dependency tract, not just dignity, but the sense of purpose, the sense that that dollar you earned, he said, it's worth something to me. I earned this.
Yeah, work bestows not just income, it also bestows dignity. Marxism gives you worse than the dependency state. It gives you gulags. Let's not forget that it's never made bread, it's only made bread lines.
It's always amazed me how, it's never made bread, it's only made bread lines. It amazes me how somebody walks around with swastika and they will be rightly denounced back, but they have a Che Rivera shirt on it, and that's just cool.
A sadistic racist.
I know guys with that wear hammer and sickle stuff, and they just think it's cool. There's a restaurant that does this here in Denver. There's a beer company that has it. And it's like, that's the symbol of more death, carnage, and oppression than anything in the history of mankind.
Well, Che Guevara, I mean, if you just, again, read him, his letters to his dad, the things he said, he was very racist against blacks, very racist against Mexicans, and he was a sadist who wrote to his dad, I discovered that I love to kill. I mean, and this guy is to be celebrated?
Bring it back to this. Let's try to wrap it up. So, you've taken a deep dive on the official BLM organization.
There are various. That's the main one. There's also the Movement for Black Lives, but BLM GNF is the main one.
Right. And it's funded by the left. I am shocked.
But also by corporate America and by philanthropies.
Is that part of the kind of the Jesse Jackson shakedown that worked so well through the 80s and 90s, which is you better show us that you love our movement by giving us money. Otherwise, you're going to be boycotted and ridiculed, and businesses have no spine for that.
I don't think this is so much the Al Sharpton syndrome as it is. I can't explain it. Why George Soros and his foundations and Warren Buffett's son and his foundations do not give money to BLM GNF to buy peace. There are other things at work here, and I don't really. They're beyond my ken. I'm sorry, John. I'm failing you here. I'm not a psychologist, and I don't know why Noble Foundation, founded by Warren Buffett's son, gave so much money to IDX, which later become classic currency.
Is it white guilt? I mean, I look at George Soros, and I know we're getting a little off the topic.
No,
George
he's a great
Soros,
funder of.
Not only is he a great funder of the left and this communist movement, but he's also a great funder in places like his home of Hungary for truly open records and open government. And over there, you and I, if we knew nothing of him, would go, "Oh, God bless him for trying to open this up." It fascinates me.
Yeah, I just note that this happens. You know, Henry Ford, the third, the grandson of Henry Ford, left the Ford Foundation after he was the head of the Ford Foundation, wrote a letter saying, I want you to understand, you're bringing down every penny that you use in your work against capitalism was produced by capitalism.
Right.
You may want to give this some thought. You know, I recommend that you read the letter because he just said, you know, I don't want to call you communists, but you're destroying capitalism, which pays your salary.
You know, it happens so often when capitalists put their money into philanthropic entities, the generations pervert it for something that would never.
The Gates Foundation is going to be haunting the lives of my children and grandchildren.
And by the way, I worry about this, and it also breaks apart the families that and I made a decision for my kids' sake years ago that because of that I would never become wealthy, and it's been a tough. Well, I mean, I've stuck to it.
You and I have made similar choices.
Yeah, it was one of those things. I don't want my money and my wealth to be used generations from now, so I've decided not to create it.
Right.
It's a big thing. Yeah. People want to get the book. Where?
Amazon is selling really well. It was number one in Black history, number one in social policy. I was outselling Kendi and Nicole Hannah-Jones, and it's still today like number 10. No, it's sold really well.
And when you read it, if you put it down, the sentence you'll say after was, "I didn't know that."
The riots of last year existed, or that they were not spontaneous. They were not spontaneous when 127 million emails were sent.
Incredible. Hey, Mike, thanks so much. We'll do it again.
John. Thank you.
If you enjoyed that conversation, by all means, click one of these other great programs. We have the best conversations with the most fascinating Coloradans. And subscribe to our channel. Just click down below and hit that little bell button, too. You don't want to miss a single show.